Are you eager to dive deep into the future of healthcare? I'm Jim Weiss, founder and chairman of Real Chemistry. Join me on my podcast, Get Real with the Chairman, where we connect the dots between healthcare innovators and the communities they serve. I'm here to simplify the complexity of today's healthcare landscape with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Tune in to hang with us on Health Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform, and start transforming your healthcare mojo today.
You'll engage your audience. You'll ask them questions. You'll tell your story. You tell what you did to fix whatever was broken in your story. And then you have a call to action at the end. And then you finish by connecting with the heart. When you use that system, that creates the enrollment of not everybody, because it's not supposed to be everybody, but it creates the enrollment of the right people in the room, the right investors, the right patients, whoever it is that needs what you have. That's the formula for disseminating your message.
How can nurses and healthcare professionals literally use their voices to advance their careers and expand their access to exciting opportunities, including, but not limited to, public speaking? Let's talk all about it with international public speaker, speaker trainer, and personal mentor, Marianne Hickman, right here on episode 504 of The Nurse Keith Show. Hey there, this is Nurse Keith. This podcast is always about you and your personal and professional development, your career, and the healthcare system writ large. And I'm here to share education, ideas, and informative interviews with some of the most inspiring people from the worlds of healthcare, nursing, entrepreneurship, medicine, and beyond. I love having you along for the ride, and I thank you from the bottom of my nurse podcaster's heart for being part of the growing Nurse Keith Nation. If you'd like to help other people find the show, you can leave a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts or Google or Spotify, or just share the show with anyone who you think might get something out of it. And if you'd like to become a patron at patreon.com, it's patreon.com/Nurse Keith. You can join others who give as little as $2 a month to help keep the lights on here at the Nurse Keith Show. But however you're interacting with us, I appreciate it. Thank you for being here and thanks for listening. The show notes are at nursekeith.com, of course, and they're available in any app where you happen to be listening. And as I said, we're here today with Marianne Hickman. She's an expert international speaker, a trainer of speakers, and a mentor. And Marianne, it's so good to have you here. And I want to start by asking you, why is it important for us to know how to use our voices effectively in order to get what we want and get where we want to go in life? Whether we're a public speaker, a nurse, a doctor, it doesn't really matter. What is it about the voice?
Well, this is a very umbrella, huge question.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I always go back to this story in scripture. I'm a Christian myself, and there's a story in scripture about a group of people that God considered to be very, very sinful. And they were trying to build a tower to get to God. You know, all of their ego was being built into this thing. And he warned them and he said, listen, if you don't knock it off, there's going to be consequences to this. And the consequence in this scripture turns out to be that God confounded their language. And he made them unable to communicate with each other. And if we think about why was that the destruction of a community? Why? I mean, he could have knocked down the tower. He could have taken away the water, and he could have taken away all of the food and all of that. But even then, civilizations continue to persist. They continue They continue to exist. And when we take away our ability to communicate with one another, that is the most destructive element that we can have as a family unit, as a hospital, as a work situation, when we can't communicate. And the way that we experience this most often now is not with a lack of communication, although sometimes that does pop up, but with a failure to understand. When we misunderstand each other, bombs can literally go off. When we, Malcolm Gladwell has published several books on this. When we misunderstand each other, planes crash. When we misunderstand each other, the emotions fly. And if we first seek to understand, that is step number one in communication, not to be understood, is to understand one another, because that can then determine our thoughts, which then precipitate our actions, which then precipitates our results. And even Dr. Joe Dispenza spends a lot of time talking about the internal dialogue, the internal communication, and what that does to even the mitochondria in the cell, and how they show up and how they replicate and how they behave. So communication in and of itself cannot be over explained when it comes to the terms of how important and critical it is. And when you master it, it creates a progression in your career. It creates personal growth. It's everything and it starts with really within ourselves, but then of course extends to rooms and live events and seeing patients and so forth.
Mm-hmm. That's an awesome response. And you've already mentioned Joe Dispenza and Malcolm Gladwell, two awesome authors, and people should definitely look into them for sure. And, when we think about speaking and speech, a lot of people have fear. So, of course, getting up on stage and speaking is a great fear for many people. You and I both do that. You do it a whole lot more than I do. You're much more expert than I am. But I've gotten up on given enough keynotes and plenary session speeches and things like that I kind of understand that world, and I'm comfortable going up there and speaking. It's not a big deal for me. Mm-hmm. So, but even if someone doesn't want to become a public speaker, do a keynote at a conference, you need to present to your team. You might need to present to your dissertation committee when you're working on your PhD and, in a PhD program. You might need to lead a meeting, or maybe grand rounds are happening at your hospital and you're the one who's supposed to introduce each physician and leader as you go around and grand rounds happens. So the ability to communicate comes up everywhere, and healthcare is all about communication, right?
Absolutely.
And even in a job interview, if you go to a job interview, you've got to be able to speak to why you're awesome. Like, why are you the ideal candidate in the first place? Or there's so many opportunities. And I speak to a lot of people who feel like they don't know how to use their voice. So we'll get to public speaking. But I first just want to ask you, if someone wants to build confidence and they want to be able to just present a case to their team and do it in a way that's concise and clear and, it just gets the point across and is maybe moving to people, where do people start? Like, what are the basics where you can do that and have that ability to communicate be something that you can really own as yours?
Yeah, you're right. Public speaking is the number one fear in the world, which blows my mind when I think about all the things you can be scared of. I would be more scared to perform brain surgery than I would to be. I mean, feels like there's more on the line, but in a way, maybe there's not. This fear of speaking, this number one fear in the world, based on the research that I've done and the studies that I've read and the people that I've interviewed, the public speaking fear comes from a place of ego. What if I mess up? What if they don't like me? What if I pee my pants on stage? What if all of these things about me? And when we get outside of ourselves and realize that if I'm speaking to an audience, whether it's doing rounds at the hospital or leading a meeting or even getting up on stage, it's no longer about me. The reason that I'm asked to speak is because someone needs something that I have. And when I show up to serve, then there's no room for stage fright. There's no room for lack of confidence. I was thinking about this with my daughter. My daughter was 16 years old, and we had the world shut down during some formidable time of her age development and social development. She wasn't going to school. We weren't going to church. We were siloed. There was very little interaction. If we all remember what happened in 2020 and then the years that followed that. And I watched her as she became more and more and more introverted, and it concerned me. And I contributed to the problem a little bit because I bought her an iPad.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, I know. Regrets, right? But the day we were driving home, we called her and told her, hey, we're going to be a little late coming home. Would you mind calling Domino's and ordering the pizza for us for pizza movie night tonight? And it stopped her in her tracks. And I thought, you are 16 years old and you can't talk to an adult or even another teenager at a Domino's. There's something wrong here. So I pushed her into it. I said, we're not eating tonight unless you make the phone call. we're not having pizza tonight unless you make the phone call. And then I had her, start doing other things. She went and got a job. Because we stopped doing the socialistic allowance approach. So she went and got a job where she was running a cash register and talking to people all day, every day. So in answer to how do we overcome this and get more confidence, the first thing is remember that you're not there for you. You're there for other people, and we're ready to serve other people. It's really easy to be confident in that because it's no longer about us. It's about solving whatever they came into the room to get solved. Number two is if you want to speak with more confidence, you need to speak more. You need to do this. And when I tell my students this, I say, here, let's try this. See what happens if you go live on social media 50 times in 2 weeks. It's a big push and it's a huge squeeze for a lot of people because they're afraid of the camera. Again, the stage fright thing is really weird comes up. But when you get to the point where you can go and watch your previous videos without cringing, that's a good sign. But you can't do that unless you have done this so many times. Your 100th stage, your 100th presentation, your 100th training that you conduct is going to be astronomically better than your first. But you can't have your 100th unless you do your first. So if you want to get better at it, you got to get the reps in.
Mm-hmm. So it's really like exercising a muscle to get it stronger. And are there particular skills that are helpful to learn if one wants to be able to get their point across? Are there actual techniques one can employ in order to increase your confidence because you feel like you kind of have it down? Are there little exercises and things you can do along the way to kind of move this process forward?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's millions of little, I call these hard skills. Confidence in and of itself is a soft skill, meaning it doesn't have a metric unless I just rate myself on my confidence. But you can do, again, I'm going to name drop again. Alex Hormozi teaches this hard skill versus soft skill duality. If you're looking for confidence as a soft skill, there are little silos of hard skills that say, okay, these make up a confident person. If I do several of these things, that exemplifies a confident person. So we really have to ask ourselves, what does a confident person do? What does a confident, wonderful public speaker, what does a world-class public speaker do? Do they smile when they walk into the room, or are they distracted texting on their phone? Do they express themselves through the use of non-repetitive body language, meaning conscious body language? Do they smile when they speak? Do they ask questions? Do they leverage the language of silence? Do they pause appropriately? Do they make people laugh? Do they change the state of the room every so often? And these little things can stack up to where now I'm a confident speaker because I have these patterns. One of the things that we all would do well to remember, and I love the show. I don't know if you've seen this show. Have you watched the show Lie to Me?
No.
Oh, I love this show. This was a show that's has an Australian actor, or at least he plays an Australian character, but he is part of a consultation group, the Lightman Group, where the main character is a human lie detector, outperforms your average lie detector test because he understands body language and micro expressions. And the reason I love this show is the science behind the fictional drama that they produced is real science. And I talked to I interfaced with, not talked to, I can't wait to have this guy on my podcast, but the scientist behind the microexpressions in the body language study runs a whole board, runs his own training company. He's been the consultant for the movie Inside Out, where they use microexpressions and talk about emotions quite frequently. And the thing that we can do, one of the easiest things to do is video yourself speaking. Whether it's a keynote that you're delivering in front of a live audience or a training that you're giving in a clinic or whoever you're speaking to. You can even practice it one-on-one when you have to deliver news to a patient. And if you video yourself doing that, or you video yourself pretending to do that, and then play back the video with the sound off, You're going to learn incredible things about what your body says when you can't hear your words. And it's been said, and I can't quote the exact study for you, but the studies show that it is 10% or less of what we communicate to another person is communicated in our words. I think the last report that I read was about 3%. It is 3% of what we say that actually lands. The other 97% of what we understand from one another comes through the tone in which we communicate and the body language with which we use. So if you want to understand what you're conveying, you have to understand what you're saying without using your words. And this playback without the sound will do that for you. You can also play back without the video and listen to your tone and see if it matches the messaging that you're trying to convey. All of those things come down to, what is my audience understanding based on what I'm conveying? There's lots of tools that we can use. And I use this tool with my family quite a bit because these are one-on-one conversations. I like to use the tool that Malcolm Gladwell talks about in his book, and it's usually referred to in the world of psychology as reflective listening. What did you hear me say? What do you understand based on what I said to you? Did you hear me at all? Malcolm Gladwell shares this story, and I can't remember which one of his books it is, and I've absorbed them all because I love them so much, but I'm a pilot, so this story resonates with me. There was a story of a plane that was flying, and the plane was running out of fuel, dangerously low on fuel, catastrophically low on fuel. And due to the dialect that, and I believe it was Chinese speaking, the pilots and the control tower were using with one another. There are several layers of formalism when it comes to conversing in the Chinese language, depending on who you're speaking to. Now, in this scenario, if I remember the story correctly, the pilot saw the control tower as a higher authority figure than the pilot for the plane that they were flying, which is crazy to think of because the control tower is not in the plane. Now, when the plane radioed the control tower and said, "We're dangerously low on fuel," the control tower responded with, "Okay, well, just circle around until you find something." And the pilot didn't question it whatsoever, even though it resulted in a fatal crash because there was nothing to circle around. It crashed into a mountain, massive loss of life because of the communication. It just blows me away because there was that we didn't question it. The pilot didn't tell the tower, "Well, actually, there's no place to circle. I need you to find me an airport within a 20-kilometer span so I can land this plane and we can refuel." That wasn't stated because there was no clarify, verify. So when you're speaking with your kids, with your spouse, with your coworkers, with whoever's in your world, especially when what you communicate can result in a pivotal shift in someone's experience, and especially in hospitals where it can be a life or death thing. I can't describe how critical it is to say, "Please repeat to me what you understand," not what I said to you. Please repeat to me what you understand to make sure we are on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to talk about tools, that's one that might drive you crazy, but it might save some lives.
It's a very good one. And, people listening might be staff nurses, boots on the ground kind of nurses, or some might be leaders, managers, chief nursing officers, runs the gamut.
Right.
And so you mentioned life or death. So of course, healthcare can be life or death, just like aviation, right? And when we need to communicate something, when we need something, when we want someone to do something, or we need help, we have to be really clear. Like when you take a CPR or life support class, one thing they say is when you get to someone, if it's on the street or anywhere else, if there's other people around, but you're the person activating the emergency medical system, the first thing is you turn to a specific person and you say, "You call 911 or call a code," or whatever it happens to be. You can't just yell it out into the ethers to see if someone's going to do it. You have to pick a person, look them in the eye and say, "You're going to do this." And I think that type of assertiveness is really hard for a lot of people. And I think in healthcare, we have power dynamics, really major power dynamics and power differentials. And I think that's something that trips people up. That's what I perceive based on a lot of conversations I've had. So before we take a break, I want to ask you this question. When there's a power differential, right? And especially if you're going up the chain of command and you need something, you have to ask for something. How do you, what do you have to summon within yourself in order to use your voice in a way that gets your point across when you're speaking to authority? How do you do that?
Oh man, you're asking the expert on who felt totally intimidated by authority figures. I was raised in a household of 10 kids. I was the youngest. All of my siblings were authority figures. All my parents were the authority figures, school, church, you name it. Everyone was in charge and not me. But I have come to learn that, especially guys, I'm going to drop a book on you. There's a book called How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. I recommend if you report to anyone that you read this book, because if we encounter the intimidation of the authority figure that disables our own power or inflates our egos to the point where we are disrespectful, we've lost whatever we're trying to work on. I have found that my best case scenarios occur when I understand, again, this same idea of where are we on the same page and what are we all driving to? Because if you're reporting to someone in any scenario, then likely you are driving toward the same purpose somehow. Whether it's, and I don't work in hospitals, but I worked in plenty of organizations. So I don't know the names of the hierarchy of positions there. But if you have someone that you are, you're under, I will say, or that you report to, one of my favorite reps or techniques, if you will, is using the phrase, in order for me to, and then I fill in the need of the person who is above me. When I ran sales, they wanted me to produce a certain quota every week and a certain quota every day. So I would say, in order for me to fulfill this quota, again, naming the thing that we have in common, because I want to fulfill the quota, that just means more success, more money in my pocket, better for my team. In order for me to do this, here's what I need. And this is a pivotal portion, especially when you're in the operating theater or when you're serving a patient. We all want the same thing. The patient wants the same thing. The staff wants the same thing. Your nurses want the same thing. Everyone in that room wants the patient to walk away healthy. Mm-hmm. And in order to do this, we have to do our part. We all have to play our part, and we all have to be on the same page. We need to know the administration of the proper medications. We need to know who's understood what and when. This is why patients have charts. Mm-hmm. In order for me to accomplish XYZ task, here's what I need. Can you help? Can you do this?
Right. And so that's being very assertive. So it's not saying, could you possibly, it's saying, in order for me to discharge this patient on time, I need fill in the blank, right? Mm-hmm. So nurses, or many nurses who I've encountered, have a hard time with that type of assertiveness. I was speaking with someone this morning who's really having a hard time with that, in order to make herself heard, even to make herself seen. She feels invisible. And I was talking to her about using her voice and, learning to speak up, and even asking someone how their weekend was. You have to sort of be visible for people to see you. And, for a leader to know what you need, you have to tell them. And it's really hard. A lot of nurses have a hard time with that. So when we come back from the break, I want to talk more about communication and speaking. And I really want to talk about public speaking, because there's so many opportunities for nurses and healthcare professionals to speak to groups, whether it's groups of 3 or 4 or groups of hundreds. So I'd like to dig into that. So hang in there with us. We're going to be right back with the second half of episode 504 of The Nurse Keith Show with Marianne Hickman. And welcome back to the second half of the episode. We're here again with friend of the pod and my new friend and colleague, Marianne Hickman, public speaker trainer, and mentor. And Marianne, before the break, we were talking about using one's voice in an assertive way. And you shared that particular technique or strategy or tool of saying, in order for me to fill in the blank, right? So I was mentioning to you right before we broke that nurses and healthcare professionals have a lot of opportunities to speak. Maybe you're teaching, I don't know, doing some diabetes education with a group of 20 patients, and you need to teach some important tools. And we learn some of that in nursing school, depending on the program. However, there's a lot of nurse entrepreneurs. There's a lot of people out there now who are starting or have their own businesses. Either they've invented a product and they're trying to market the product. I was talking with a client last night who has a product on the market.
Wow.
And we were going over her slide deck because she's doing a pitch at a pitch fest. And then we have nurses. We do have a lot of public speakers and coaches, writers, all these sorts of people, trainers, consultants. So when we're talking about public speaking to more than like just one or two people, where do we start in terms of beginning to build our confidence and feeling like our voice matters? Because I feel like for a lot of nurses, we have to begin at the bottom, which is like that my voice even matters in the mix. So where do we start to build confidence? What are some ways to start that engine?
Well, the first thing that we need to do is understand why we're speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we presenting to this group of patients who have diabetes? Is it because we were asked to by our boss, or is it because there's 20 people that need our help? One of the things that I love to do, and it doesn't matter if you're public speaking, it doesn't matter if you're manufacturing products, the profession is irrelevant. The confidence in order to execute the profession or the desire is what comes first. What I like to do with everyone in my world is I sit them down and I say, close your eyes and imagine yourself a year from now. What does your bank account look like? What does where do you wake up? If you had no restrictions, you're living your ideal life. Anne Webb talks about the ideal life vision. I've adopted a lot of her techniques. If you woke up when you wanted, where you wanted, with whom you wanted, ate what you wanted, did what you wanted, what would that look like? Beyond that, now we've got all the toys and all the house paid off and all the fancy cars. What are you doing with your time? Are you serving people? And I can't think of a single instance except for one where the students or the people in my community were like, I want to be doing this for other people. I want to be helping people. There was one guy who's like, I just want to drive my Ferrari in the Florida Keys. I'm like, you go for it. But this living this vision, then if we act as if we're already there, we ask ourselves the question, who would I have to be in order to be living that way? What's the first internal dialogue that is going on in my brain? Am I imposing limits on myself, thinking that I'm not smart enough? I'm not trained enough? The reason that we have limits in speaking or lack of confidence is because the internal dialogue has sold us on the idea. I believe that all communication is a form of sales. Even if you're not transacting a product or selling a mechanism, you're selling an idea. You're pitching an idea. And if you don't believe that to be the case, then you've already just sold yourself on that idea. And when you have bought an idea that doesn't serve you, now you're eroding your confidence. Now you think that you're less than, and there is no more powerful voice in the world than the one between your own ears. Once we understand what the gap is between this life that we want to live, this imaginary forward prophecy, if you will, and where we're at, we're saying, how big is this gap? How deep is this gap? Am I standing in front of the Grand Canyon? What's holding me back? What are the ideas? What's the internal dialogue? Or in other words, what is the reason I'm not there yet? And when we understand that, more often than not, these ideas result of a misinterpretation of events, often from childhood. And we interpret things as children. Children are incredible listeners, but horrible interpreters. we internalize these things. We create what's commonly referred to as trauma brain. And this trauma brain can dictate our thoughts and our actions as we grow older, which, as we know, oftentimes doesn't serve us. So when we ask ourselves, okay, what is the reason that I'm not confident? Well, it's because when I was 5 years old, my mom yelled at me and she used the word shut up. And that made me internalize my voice isn't worth using, or my voice isn't worth hearing. And now I ask myself some of the most important questions that I ask myself as often as I shower, because our brains do need to be washed. The number one question is this limit true? And it may feel true, so we need to answer honestly. Is this limit true like gravity is true? The next question is, more important, do I want this to be true? Do I want this limit to be true if I'm not confident? Do I want this limit to be true if I don't know how to use my voice? Do I want this limit to be true if I don't know how to speak to people? Most of the time, the answer is no, because who we want to be doesn't have the limit. Number 3, with increasing importance, is what would I prefer to be true instead? What would serve me better? What's an idea that would serve me better? And with that idea, it might be, I lovingly serve people. I know how to show up in rooms confidently. I love using my voice because it does so much good. When we walk into whatever meeting or whatever keynote, whatever presentation, whatever sales pitch we have with that voice, again, if you really think about it, this breakthrough idea, this new concept is not only in service of ourselves, but it's also in service of the people in the room. If you've got an incredible product that's a life-saving mechanism and you want people to know about it, then there's no better way than to use your voice. If you have a revolutionary idea or maybe even a groundbreaking discovery and you need to share with the world needs to know about it, there's no better way than to use your voice to do that. And we use our voice in terms of telling stories that are very deeply personal to us, that connect us deeply with our audience, not just facts. As we know, facts tell, stories sell. So if you want to sell an idea, use your story. And then I've created a sequence, I can't take credit for the invention. I've just assembled all of these ideas. People have been speaking for much longer than I've been around. I just took what they're doing and put it into a rubric, and you'll see this rubric everywhere. You'll engage your audience. You'll ask them questions. You'll tell your story. You tell what you did to fix whatever was broken in your story, and then you have a call to action at the end. And then you finish by connecting with the heart. When you use that system, that creates the enrollment of not everybody, because it's not supposed to be everybody, but it creates the enrollment of the right people in the room, the right investors, the right patients, whoever it is that needs what you have. That's the formula for disseminating your message.
Well said. And that message, like you're saying, could be to anyone. It could be patients, could be a keynote, it could be a pitch at a pitch fest. It could be anything like that. So one thing I understand is that we kind of have to read the room, right? Like if we're speaking to a group of healthcare executives, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are numbers people, they like data, then we kind of have to hit them with language that they're going to connect with. If they're not, I often tell my clients, if you're in an interview, a job interview, and you get a sense from the other person that they're pretty left-brained. Like they're really like a facts and numbers person. If you use a lot of feeling words like I feel and, things like that, the person's probably not necessarily going to connect with you, what you're saying. So you have to kind of learn to speak their language. Or if they're very touchy-feely kind of people, then you might want to go with a more personal story like you were just sharing. And then you get them in their heart and you connect in that way. And that might be more comfortable for most nurses because we're much more kind of the right brain touchy-feely, even though we have that left scientific brain too. But we're very, soft skills are really important in nursing. So are there any strategies you'd like to share about how do you read a room, whether it's a room of two people, like it's a family member and a patient, or it's a group of 50 nurse executives and you need to sell them on an idea? So what are some of the ways in which you can assess a group and a room's energy and decide like, okay, this is maybe how I'm going to approach this. Here's the language I'm going to use.
I love that we're going into this because when we think about reading a room, if we put that in a visual, I have to read information, which means I need to gather information from the room in order to read and interpret that information. So we could go in like several different directions. We want to go to quantum physics where we're actually sensing and picking up on energy and vibrational wavelengths. Do we want to talk about body language? Do we want to talk about their distraction? But really, human beings are highly sensitive, intelligent organisms. Oftentimes, we, for the sake of many cases, survival, we turn off unimportant sensory signals. Right? If you're not thinking about how your sock feels on your left pinky toe right now, that's probably a good thing because you're otherwise engaged. But now that I bring it up, you're probably aware of it, right? And when you are able to heighten your receptors when you walk into a room, it becomes very easy to read. And this, again, can be practiced. The more live events you can go to, the better, especially if you're not speaking, because you can watch without being distracted by delivering a keynote, what's happening in the room. Watch what happens to the room when the presenter doesn't stop to ask a question. Watch and observe how many people in the room are distracted on their phones or are paying attention to their laptops or are sending a message to someone else. Watch what happens when the room leans in. What precipitated that? How did the attention get captured like that? And so what we're doing is using all of our senses. When I walk into a room and I want to read the room, whether or not I'm on stage, I'm first of all asking myself, how did everyone get here? What made them come to this room? If I'm in a room of industry professionals who are all investors and they came to an event, then I'm thinking, okay, these people probably saw a piece of marketing somewhere or were referred by a friend. And what do they hope for? They're hoping for an investment opportunity with a partnership of trust. They're looking to take a little bit of a risk, but they want to mitigate their risk and have a high return on investment. Okay, now I understand why they're there. And I can have some semblance of how do I deliver this? If I'm going into a room where I have 20 patients, like you mentioned before, who are all fighting the battle of diabetes, what are they looking for? They're not necessarily in their minds saying, I hope to be healed of diabetes. What they're actually saying is, maybe they're saying, I don't want to lose my leg today. Or maybe they're saying, I can't chase my children on the playground. Or I want to breathe and I don't feel like I can. Or I'm really tired of this insulin pump. Or I'm so afraid of needles. It's this internal dialogue. I don't want to assume that I know, but I want to glean as much information as possible. So once I walk into a room, I'm going to understand why are they there and what are they probably saying to themselves on a deep level? Like, what do they complain to their friends about over a glass of wine on Friday nights that they came to this room to solve? And then when I'm presenting, or even if I'm not the keynote, I'll walk into a room and I literally start to ask, what brought you here? What are you hoping to achieve out of spending your most valuable resource, which is your time, in this room by the time you walk away? How will you know that you've checked a box? And then they're going to tell me. They're going to tell me what they hope for in soft, fluffy, flowery language, like I hope for this kind of freedom, I hope for this. But then some of them are going to have metrics and measurables. I hope to connect with one more person, or I hope to get an hour of my life back, or I hope to be able to play with my children, and I'm listening and I'm picking up on these things. Then when I'm reading the room and I'm delivering my keynote, I'm saying, are we all together? Again, are we all on the same page? Do I have them? And I do some kind of funny things when I'm delivering my keynote. I interject a lot of pauses because it's amazing what happens to an audience when nothing is being said. John Maxwell says that the most powerful language or the most powerful voice in the world is your own. And if as a speaker, I am taking up all of the sensory space in their brains, I'm not leaving room for them to think. So when I'm delivering a keynote, I pause on purpose, and it's crazy what happens. The emotions come up, we connect, they lean in, people start to cry. It's the craziest thing. Whenever I say next has the most impact. I'm also wandering the room. I'm not stuck to the stage. I will go in and I will stand next to people if I feel a connection with them or if I don't. I look for my black holes in the room. The person who has their phone up like this, I go and I stand next to them. I don't even make eye contact when I speak. And it's amazing what happens with the phone. It immediately gets put away. And now I have them. So there's so many tips and things for capturing the energy of the room, but it comes down to this: do I understand why they're there, and are we on the same page?
Those are all wonderful. And I was just thinking about a talk I gave in Daytona Beach recently, and you just mentioned you don't stay stuck in that one place. And I told the organizer, said, I never use the podium. I said, I'll get the microphone from the podium, and I said, I will never stand behind the podium again. And, I always make sure I have a lavalier so I can come down off the stage, the whole thing. Because our fear can keep us so stuck in one place. But I digress. So when we're reading the room, when we're checking on the energy, nurses do have a certain spidey sense. And I think that intuition, that like gut kind of, that way of feeling in one's body, I think nurses often know how to trust that. Like, you feel like a patient's going south, but there's no metric that tells you they're going south, but you're pretty sure they are. And you're usually right. And then the metrics will usually catch up with your intuition eventually. And so you can head it off at the pass. And I think most of us have probably had situations clinically where we didn't trust that. And then we regretted it because things went south much faster than they should have, and we could have caught it. So that's a different way of reading a room, but it's still reading it. So I think nurses can learn to apply that. And so what I'm hearing from you, if you ask me what I'm hearing, is that there's this way to assess the physical, like, people, are their arms crossed? Are their legs crossed? Are they turned away? Or is that one patient leaning forward in their chair and you're like, oh, this person's right here with me. So those are all really, really helpful. And we do have to go in a few minutes. And I want to shift gears just for a little bit as we wind down to actual public speaking. You and I have both referenced like being on stage and podiums and microphones and all that sort of thing. So say I'm a nurse leader and maybe I've written some papers, maybe I've been out in the world some, and, I have some stuff under my belt. Maybe I have my PhD now, and I'd like to start presenting at conferences. What's one of the first things I can do, or a couple steps I can take, if that's a direction I would like to go? And it feels like I would like to add that to my CV, like to give a keynote or even just give like a presentation, a plenary session. Where do you begin to bring that into your career path, even just as a side hustle?
Yeah. So the question of where do we begin precipitates from where do you want it to go? Is the goal to sell your book? Is the goal to just get your voice out there and share information that you've discovered? Maybe you've made a groundbreaking discovery. It depends on all of those things. I will say universally, though, regardless of where you're going, there are some fundamental rubrics that have helped me and my students take the stage no matter what. So the first is the signature keynote blueprint. Now, I seeded it earlier with those basic 4 steps. I've expanded it like an accordion into 10 steps of your enrolling questions, how to tell your story, how to deliver a promise, how to deliver your content, how to do your call to action, and how to close. The reason that this is so important is not because I want anyone to deliver a memorized keynote. Memorized is often not connective because now I'm so full of what I need to remember that I don't listen to what the audience needs me to say. But this framework, this 10-step framework allows you to listen to your audience, read the room, and still deliver whatever you feel called to deliver in a sequence that serves your audience. So that framework will help regardless of the stage. And podcasts are a great way to deliver. I mean, this is one reason you and I both do podcasts is because they're a great way to deliver without the pressure of needing a memorized keynote. It's a conversation. It's very easy to do.
Yeah.
So the first thing is have the rubric for your keynote. The second thing is to find the stages where your audience is going to be. Again, podcasts, a fantastic way to do that. Podcasts are unique because we always need guests, just like a newspaper always needs a story. There's thousands of podcasts out there that could be an ideal platform for you. The second are in-person events. And I always encourage everyone, if you want to speak at events, start hosting your own. Invite people to your living room. Do that every other week for a year and watch what happens. You might have no people show up, but you should still deliver because you're getting the practice in anyway. But start inviting people over for a dinner party, for a training, for a presentation. You can even be so transparent as to say, hey, I'm practicing for a larger stage. Would you just come listen to my keynote Thursday night? Easy. So getting the reps in as far as your keynote. And then, of course, this is there. I'm going to split this into two parts. Something that I have seen way too many professionals omit is number one, a call to action. Because if you deliver a powerful enough keynote, people will want more. The right people will want more of what you have, whether that's a book or an article or a guide of some kind. You know, the 5 things you can do today to enhance your life, even with your living with diabetes, sort of a thing, like something that you can give away. And then the last part is whether you're building it as a side hustle or whether you want to use speaking as an integral part of your business. If you want to take yourself seriously, you need to have a back-end CRM, a customer relationship management software. So not only you can give whatever resource away to your people and deliver it to them via email, but once you start appearing on stages, whether they're physical or digital stages, you will naturally invite customers and revenue because people will want more of what you have the moment you start speaking, even if you don't feel like you're very good at it yet. And keeping track of who are your people, who are your community, who are your tribe, if you will. Keith, I have seen people run events with 800 people multiple times over and there's no CRM. And I was like, well, how are your kids supposed to find you again? How's your audience supposed to know what you're doing next? If they want more of you, they can't because you're not sending them any information. So we've got to have those critical pieces, your rubric, your stages, your call to action, and your follow-up with your back-end software.
Those are great. Those are wonderful, really good places to start. And if people want to work with you or want to learn more about, the Marianne Hickman universe, I know they can go to mariannehickman.com, right? And your podcast is linked through there. And I've learned a lot from your podcast. And it's MARIANNE Hickman.com. So is that the best place? Is that the clearinghouse for all things related to what you do?
Oh yeah, that's my landing page for all my pilot speak just came back. That's probably the best way. I'm on all social platforms, so if people want to hang out on social, I'm there. On that webpage, there's a couple things that if you're looking on getting on stage, if you're listening and you want to do this, there's the book that I wrote for the 10-step keynote. That's on there, free. You can go and download that. There's also a database of podcasts. I've got over 800 podcasts that have all told me they need guests. And I give that away for free as well. So you've got all the tools that you need to start getting out there and in front of your audience.
That's great, Marianne. And before we go, I have 4 really quick lightning round questions I ask all my guests. Are you up for a really quick one?
I love it. Let's do it.
Okay. So of everything there is to understand, is there something about life or human nature that you would really like to still understand or understand more?
Oh, I love this question. For me, I am nerding out right now in the realm of quantum physics and how matter and thought collide and how the vibrational energy seeps through. I'm in hot pursuit of how energy transfers among human beings. So that's my nerd part right now.
Oh, nice. I like that. That's great. Okay. Second question. Who's one of those people who serves as sort of like a hero or touchstone for you? Living or dead, famous, not famous? Who's a person who's like really central in your consciousness?
The first person that comes to my mind is my husband.
Oh, it's nice. Why is that?
Well, when you say the word hero, that is a word I have used to describe him since day one for a plethora of reasons. One of which deserves highlighting is when we got married, we were both divorced, and he took on a family of 5 kids as their dad, and has been the biggest cheerleader, loudest support for everything that I've ever wanted to build. And so, in every respect, he is my hero.
Awesome. What's his first name?
Richard.
Richard, that's right. All right. Is there a book or a film, anything at all, that's changed your life or impacted you in a way that it's just one of those touchstones you just keep going back to?
Oh gosh, I have a whole library of them.
Yeah, I bet.
The first one that comes to mind that I reference often, I crack open this book all the time, is a book by Kim Scott. It's called Radical Candor. And this is a book on metacommunication. So communicating about how we communicate. My husband and I have leaned on this book. Me and my teams have leaned on this book. And it is a fabulous place. You had talked about personalities, like a healer personality and a more warrior personality. This book encompasses those personalities and communication styles in a way that teaches us how to be better communicators, because that's the touchstone and baseline of everything that we do.
Nice. Radical candor. Thank you. Okay. And last question. If you were named queen of the world tomorrow, and you had ultimate power to do everything, anything you wanted to do, what's the first thing you would want to do out of the gate to improve the lives of your subjects?
Wow. What a question. Queen of the world. I'm not sure if I want that responsibility.
Well, just queen for a day. Okay.
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to my mind, and this sounds super altruistic, but I'm actually in the study and pursuit of this right now, is to go into our prisons and our holding cells for those that have caused malicious or deliberate or accidental harm to other people, and see how many minds we can heal, not only through the power of communication, but through the power of education. And I'm a firm believer that hurt people and healed people heal people. So if we can heal the most hurt people, I think we've got a pretty good shot at making as close to a utopia as we can.
Beautiful. That's lovely. Thank you. That's awesome. I love that. Well, Marianne, thank you so much. I'm so glad we connected. I'm so glad to have you on the show. This is wonderful. Your podcast is great. Your website's wonderful. There's so many great resources, and your energy is so wonderful. So thank you for doing all this great work in the world. And thanks for gracing the airwaves and hanging out with me today.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Well, there you have it. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Nurse Keith Show. The show notes are at nursekeith.com, or just look at the app where you're listening and you will see all the links, including to mariannehickman.com. Please let her know you heard her on the show. If you need personalized holistic career coaching to elevate your career, check out Nurse Keith Coaching and nursekeith.com. Mention the show and get 10% off your first coaching package. We're proud members of the Health Podcast Network at healthpodcastnetwork.com, and we're produced adroitly and lovingly by Rob Johnston of 520R Podcasting. And before we say goodbye, I'll leave you with this quote by the musician Robert Fripp: "May my living honor my parents. May my living repay the debt of my existence." Be well, dig deep, seek joy. Keep in touch. This is Nurse Keith saying adios till next time from beautiful Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the wonderful Marianne Hickman saying arrivederci from
Linden, Utah.
All right. Thank you, Marianne. Thanks to everyone for listening. And we will always, of course, catch you on the proverbial flip side.